Everyone talks about the similarities Iron Man and Batman share. They're both rich philanthropists trying to rededicate their lives to a higher purpose. Consider that a taste of the entries to come, because there are a lot more entries in store with more flavor than this clear and evident example, and I'm not kidding. Expect surprises and character reimaginings you've never considered before, starting now. The dashing rogue traveling the galaxy getting into misadventures is now one of the coolest archetypes of all time. You could argue Han Solo is man with no name famous globally now, and Harrison Ford clearly made this character something else to behold. I don't think anyone's matched his charisma and presence until Star-Lord debuted on the silver screen. Now, clearly, Peter Quill would have seen Star Wars as a child and took some influence. That's why these two guys feel like they could swap movies and fit in perfectly with their respective crews. A young up-and-comer who's proficient in science and tech is suddenly given powers and a tragic loss to turn him into a hero. The only issue is he needs to keep his identity a secret to protect the ones he loves. You tell me, did I just describe Barry Allen or Peter Parker? I think you get the point. I'll concede that Barry's a bit older, and their tragedies don't line up perfectly, but even being mentored by an older, richer hero happens in both movie franchises. I'm willing to bet that some of you just noticed the likeness. I know Shazam technically is also Captain Marvel, but I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the Marvel superhero who's changed looks over time. Both Carol Danvers and Clark Kent are considered the faces of their respective brands. They both protect the Earth from major galactic threats while being considered the most overpowered characters to exist. Brie Larson is still growing into the Captain Marvel role on film, but look at their comic book history. The likeness is there for anyone to see. In fact, in modern stories, they both have young counterparts taking over responsibilities too. Thor isn't going to introduce himself by saying Odin's son. Thor, Odin's son anytime soon, but Daniel Craig's Bond and Chris Hemsworth's Thor follow similar character arcs. They both start out as talented, promising men who acted too recklessly to be trusted, but an older adult figure, M or Odin, reels them in over time. Then, once they finally end up seasoned and proven, the story turns on a dime. Now it's all about how their traumas haunt them and break down their drive. It's loose, but there's no doubt you can trace their stories down a similar path of growth through tragedy. You cannot bring up Thor and not mention Loki. I always liken him to the Joker. Yeah, I can hear the DC fans rising up in anger, so let me explain. Obviously, Joker is more of a chaotic presence and relies less on order to prove his point. However, Loki believes humans are opposed to freedom and meant to serve. They crumble when given a chance to choose. Joker sees humans as lemmings that are easy to manipulate when you pull the control out from under them. See, they both doubt humanity's ability to be good in the face of freedom. Both these men symbolically fight for America. For Steve Rogers, it's against Red Skull, and for Rocky, it's against Ivan Drago. That's enough to prove my point right there, but let's dive a little further. Think back to when Steve was a skinny kid from Brooklyn. He'd get into fights that he'd have no chance of winning, but he always would manage to get back up. That's Rocky Balboa energy right there. Yes, both Bane and Darth Vader have issues breathing. However, that's not the only way these two villains are alike. I know Bane isn't nearly as imposing as Vader, but look closer at their endings. Right as they face the end, both characters are given deeply sympathetic moments. For Bane, we discover he does all this because he's devoted to the child he chose to protect all those years ago. For Vader, well, you know how that one goes. Just look at how emotional this moment is. I don't think enough people appreciate how similar Will Turner and Jon Snow are in their stories. Both characters are outsiders in their own society for one reason or another. They both are underrated talents with a destiny for something greater. By the end of the story, they prove to be the leaders that their hidden pasts indicate they could be. Jon Snow finds out he's a would-be king who ultimately ends up back at Castle Black. Will Turner sacrifices his future to become the Flying Dutchman's captain. They're two peas in a pod. Speaking of Orlando Bloom, Legolas is arguably the most famous archer in pop culture. If people shouted phrases when they fired their bow, they'd yell, "Legolas!" Plenty of other characters give him a run for his money. Still, none of them match his personality as closely as Hawkeye. Think about their flair and their quips in combat. They're both relatively reserved and serious, but they always show flashes of badassery in huge fights. The real question is, who is truly more accurate? I'm not here to make that decision, but tell me your picks in the comments. Let's move on to a different Bloom. This one is fictional and way more terrifying. Lou Bloom and Norman Bates have two of the creepiest smiles on Earth. Both characters lean on their perceived weakness to get away with more immoral actions. Then when you see either guy snap, it becomes one of the most horrifying things to witness. I have no doubt the writers of Nightcrawler took inspiration from Psycho, but the way they made Lou Bloom stand out despite matching personalities is super commendable. I would not want to be in a room with these two, ever. In comparing Terminator and Groot, it's important to state which versions of the character that I'm talking about here. I pictured the T-800 from Terminator 2 Judgment Day and the adult Groot from the first Guardians of the Galaxy movies for this entry. Both of them are clearly the muscle for a smaller, socially more competent character. John Connor and Rocket are not alike in many ways, but the dynamic Groot and the T-800 add to their characters is. They provide protection and fill a hole for both characters while needing a lot of coaching on behaving normally. E.T. and Stitch could not be further apart personality-wise. E.T. is calm and curious with a soothing demeanor. In contrast, Stitch is wild and reckless with a need to destroy things. I'm not comparing those aspects though, because in reality, they both impact the kids who take them in almost the exact same way. The two of them both find a child with issues fitting in and help teach them to be comfortable with who they are. Sure, E.T. leaves in the end and Stitch stays, but both characters help the main character grow up in a big way. The minute I made this connection, I could not resist making it an entry on this list. I know, it's wild to put these two together, but hear me out. Both Harry Potter and Scott Pilgrim go through 7 trials they did not expect to be put through, and come out stronger and more mature by the end. Harry's problems are presented by each year in his school, and Scott's are obviously the 7 evil exes. By the end of their respective journeys, both guys learn to appreciate the people in their life and gain the confidence to overcome their own self-doubt. The fact James Cameron made both the sequel movies that turned these women into iconic characters is a detail that no one should look past. Obviously, he used the same formula to craft the story arcs of these characters. That should not discredit this entry though, because both Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley discover that strength differently. Sarah grows lean and mean over the years preparing for Doomsday, but Ripley is thrust into her trauma suddenly and with hesitance. By the end of the movie, they both confronted their fear and prevailed over it. I would pay money to see Ron Burgundy interview Michael Scott for, well, whatever reason. They could be talking about the most boring subject ever and that would entertain me. These characters both fall into the same comedic vein after all. Both want to be taken seriously but always manage to fall on their face in big moments. However, even when everyone in the room doubts them, they can still manage to surprise their skeptics with outstanding moments. Michael Scott in The Chili's is just like Ron Burgundy redeeming himself at the zoo. Hilarious and triumphant. You know, I also just noticed that Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne really like their butlers. Tony names Jarvis after the one he had as a kid, and then there's Alfred literally being Bruce's rock. That's all kind of odd too, because how many billionaires have butlers like that in real life, you know?